I'm satisfied with just a cottage below, a little silver and a little gold. But in that city where the sun will shine, I want a gold one, that silver one. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop, in that far land where we'll never go. And someday yonder we will never go wander, but walk the streets that are pure as gold. Don't think me poor or deserted or lonely. I'm not discouraged. I'm heaven bound. I'm just a pilgrim in search of a city. I want a mansion, a robe and a crown. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop, in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk the streets that are pure as gold.
Number 311. Number 311. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. When darkness veils his lovely face, I rest on his unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. When he shall come with trumpet sound, oh, may I then in him be found, rest in his righteousness alone, faultless to stand before the throne. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. You will please mark your hymnals to number 574. That will be the song of encouragement this morning, number 574. The song before the lesson, let's stand and sing number 297. I'm in the way, the bright and shining way. I'm in the glory land way. Telling the world that Jesus saves today. Yes, I'm in the glory land way. I'm in the glory land way.
1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 8, the Apostle Peter says, and above all things, have fervent love for one another. It's interesting that if you back up just a little bit, that the Apostle Peter is given sort of some final admonitions. He's talking about the end that is coming. It's likely that he was making reference to the destruction of Jerusalem. It may have been that he was talking about the end of time, but in the context, Jerusalem and its destruction seems a little more logical. But it was going to be a very trying time, a very troublesome time, a very terrible time for those that lived in Jerusalem. And he says, above all, as a priority, have fervent love for one another. You know, the very foundation of our Christianity and our faithfulness is our love for God and our love for one another. You remember in Matthew chapter 22, there was a lawyer that was trying to put Jesus on the spot and to trick him in some way. And he asked him what was the greatest of the commandments. In about verse 37, Jesus said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. Now this is the first and the greatest commandment, but the second is likened to it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. This was the very foundation of all the commandments. If a person did not have love for God and love for his fellow man, then keeping these other commandments really would not be pleasing to God at all. Well, the same thing is true with us today as well. It is good for us to be here. It is good for us to pray together. It's good for us to sing these beautiful songs and hymns. It was wonderful for us a moment ago to partake of the communion, the Lord's Supper, and to remember the sacrifice that's made for us. It's good for us to be led in prayer and to lift our thoughts up. But if we don't love each other, we're not going to make it to heaven. You see, it's our love for God and it's our love for each other. And it is to be a fervent, a diligent love that we have for each other. And Peter recognized that. And Peter understood that. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, I want to read the first 3 verses, because Paul, as he talked to the Christians of Corinth, he's been talking to them about spiritual gifts in chapter 12, and he'll continue that line of thinking in chapter 14. In the midst of these 2 chapters, in talking about spiritual gifts, he talked about something that was more important than all these spiritual gifts. Here's what he said. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity or love, I am become a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal, just a little noise, maybe even an irritating noise. Paul says, if I don't have love, that's what I'm like. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. Even if a person is a great person of faith, a person that believes in God with all their heart, soul, and mind, but if that person doesn't have love for his fellow man, it's of no value. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity or love, it profiteth me nothing. Interesting that Paul is saying that you and I, we're nothing if we don't really love God and love one another. Remember in John, I think it's in 1 John, the latter chapters, he says that if we say that we love one another, but we don't, he says if we say that we love God, but we don't love one another, that we're lying. The truth is not in us. For how can you love God whom you have not seen when you don't love those that you do see on a regular basis? For God so loved the world. You know, someone said, you know, I love the world, but it's my neighbor next door I got a problem with. Well, I think we can relate to that. It's easy to say that we love everybody, generally speaking, that we love the world. But that person that's irritating, that person that gets on our nerves, that person that grumbles and fusses, that person that challenges us every day, that person that maybe mistreats us and doesn't speak well of us, to love that person. And maybe even within our families. It's a challenge sometimes for us to love our husband or our wife, to love other family members, to love the neighbor next door that won't keep his dog or his cat out of my yard. To love that person is a challenge for us. And yet Paul is saying, and Peter is saying, above everything, he says, I'm nothing if I don't have love for my fellow man. I want us to think this morning about some particulars so that we might be able to evaluate our love to see whether or not this is something that we're falling short on. First, we notice that our love is expressed and can be seen as genuine if we do good one to another. Now, there is a difference, I think, between being good to people and actually doing good to people. We may very well be kind, and we may be thoughtful. We may be courteous to everybody that we meet. But there's a difference there between that and looking to do good. Looking for things that we can do. In Matthew chapter 25, beginning in verse 34, Jesus is talking about the judgment scene and the division of the sheep and the goats. And the division was in the doing. The difference was in the doing, the actions. He talks about visiting somebody that's sick, somebody that's in prison. He talks about giving a drink to somebody that's thirsty, or food to somebody that's hungry, or clothing for someone that doesn't have proper clothing. And Jesus said, insofar as you do this to the least of one of these, you are doing that unto me. So he describes that as acts of service for him when we actually do things for one another, for our neighbors, for our family, and for our friends. So there is a looking to do. If we really love one another, we're not just going to be good, but we're going to be doing good, you see, one to another. One of our priorities will be in helping the poor, and particularly orphans and widows and others in dire circumstances. In Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 17, the wise man says, he that has pity on the poor, he that has pity on the poor, is going to have a reward, or it will be given back to him. So the Lord looks down upon us, and when we have pity on those that are less fortunate than us, when we do good, that something in turn is going to be given back to us. We're going to be blessed. In James chapter 1 and verse 27, James says, pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. The word visit there has to do with this idea of looking for the good that we can do. Looking for things that will help us or allow us to do good to others that are less fortunate than us. So, do I love my fellow man? Am I looking for good that I can do? And the ultimate good that we can do that proves our love for others is to tell them about Jesus. In Mark chapter 16, verses 15 and 16, in the Great Commission, he says, go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not shall be condemned. That's the greatest good, but many times we can't separate that from the good that we do of a physical or a material nature. There's a group of missionaries that went into Greenland, and they worked for a year and hardly converted anybody. They just didn't seem to be able to get the gospel message across to the people. But at the end of that year, there was a terrible smallpox outbreak, and it became an epidemic. The missionaries stayed, and they helped take care of the people that got smallpox, and they even helped bury the dead. When the epidemic finally was over and people were getting better, someone said to the missionaries, they said, you know, you've helped us care for the sick, and you've helped us bury our dead. Now, tell us about your religion. So many times, that's exactly the way it works. It is in the doing of good, because we have a fervent love, you see, for our neighbors and our acquaintances, that opens the door then for us to talk to them about Jesus. And sometimes those doors will never be opened unless we are the kind of people that are looking to do good to others. But then secondly, our love for one another is seen in our willingness to be a forgiving type of individual or person. We find in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 32, Paul says, "Be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ Jesus hath forgiven you." It's interesting as he talks about being kind, being thoughtful, being tender-hearted, and being forgiven. And he qualifies that by saying that God has forgiven you. And because God has forgiven you, that's why you need to be this kind of a loving, tender-hearted, forgiving type of person. There is a need for us, if we truly want to please God, and if we want to be happy in this life. You know, the most miserable people in the world. In fact, happiness is pretty much impossible if we don't learn to forgive one another. Anger, jealousies, envy, all of those types of things just sort of build up in us. And the only way for us to handle those things is for us to understand the importance of being a forgiving individual. Jesus is the supreme example in doing good and doing what's right. And you remember from the cross in Luke chapter 23, verse 34, Jesus, as he looked down from the cross and he could see the soldiers that had put him there. There were those religious folks that were making fun of him and calling him names. There was family. But he said, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Indeed, Jesus had that forgiving type of a heart. In 1 Peter chapter 2, about verse 23 and 24, Peter says, even when he was tormented, you know, he did not say things that were mean or ugly. He didn't plan vengeance upon these people. Even when he suffered, Jesus did not have that attitude of getting even and getting his own back. So here is an example that we are to follow. Forgiveness is such a wonderful and a beautiful thing, and it's not an option if we want to please God. Loving people, if we really love one another, we're going to have an open heart. We're going to have a forgiving heart that seeks to offer forgiveness in every way that we possibly can. But then thirdly, there's also the need for us to recognize the power, but also to understand the power for good as well as bad in reference to what we say. If we really love one another, we're not going to gossip about one another. We're not going to slander one another. But we're going to try to upbuild and uplift. In Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 8, he said, the words of a talebearer are like wounds. Sometimes the biggest hurt that we've ever had is something that somebody said. And it wounds us worse than if they just wadded up their fist and hit us in the face. And I'm afraid sometimes that we wound one another without even realizing it. In James chapter 4 and verse 11, he says it this way. He says that there's a power in the evil use of the tongue. You know, to use the tongue wrongly. There's a power and there's a certain degree of evil in that. And we need to understand and realize that this is a challenge for all of us. To be so very careful about what we say and how we say a particular thing. And realize that we can build up, we can lift up, we can encourage and we can strengthen with the tongue. But oh, how quickly we can do damage to one another and how we can discourage one another. A person that has the love that passes all understanding, that has the love that Peter says we have to have, and that Paul says we need to have, or we're nothing in 1 Corinthians 13. That kind of love is the kind of love that will be very careful and very concerned about the particular speech that is used. To be a gossip, to be a talebearer, removes us from being pleasing to God. In Psalm 15, verses 1 through 3, he talks about dwelling or abiding in the tabernacle of the Lord. And he says the person that does that is an upright person. And it is a person that is not a backbiter with the tongue. So if we want to abide with Jesus, if we want to be pleasing to Jesus, if we want to be what we ought to be in the Lord's church, we're going to have to make sure that we control the tongue and that we constantly be aware of how unloving and how unkind and how evil it is when we say mean and hurtful and ugly things. We need to concentrate continually on being a positive person, to be an uplifting type of person. Also, if we have love for one another, we're going to be the kind of people that really care, that have a genuine care for others. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 8, Paul talks about the care that he had for the brethren there. And he mentions what he had done. The preaching, the teaching, the serving. And it was because there was a real care, a real concern for them. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, beginning with verse 24 and following, we find that the Apostle Paul talking about the very same thing in reference to the Corinthians. And he said there should be no schism among you, but that there would be a genuine care, one for another. The idea of a schism is a division, basically made based upon opinion. And Paul says, that there shouldn't be a division in the church. There shouldn't be a division in the congregation. But there needs to be a common care. The idea, it seems, is that we don't play favorites. That we're not divided up into little groups. But that we have a common care for every single person. The people that we're closest friends with, as well as that person that maybe we don't even know beyond maybe just knowing their name. But that there is a care there. And he says it's expressed in this way in that next verse. When a person is hurt, or when there's a sorrow, when there's something that goes wrong, he says we suffer with that person. But when a person is honored, we rejoice with that person as well. There is a challenge, I think, for us to recognize the power that's there when we are that type of a caring individual, and also recognize the danger. The danger is selfishness, I think, many times. We've all probably been in situations wherein we had someone to die close to us. And we remember how precious it was when people called, when people sent cards, when people came to visit, maybe came by the funeral home, those types of things. We've had experiences where maybe it was a shower for a baby or a wedding shower. We've had situations where maybe we had surgery or maybe somebody close to us had surgery. A lot of us, we've had loved ones in the nursing home and those types of situations. And I think all of us can remember, whether people came or not. We remember who came. We remember who we got a card from. We remember who called us on the phone. We remember those things. And yet sometimes when it happens to others, we don't call. We don't send a card. We don't go. If we could just remember how our feelings are hurt or how lonely we felt when someone did not come to us, would we not do a better job in going to them? You see, we get busy. We have all of our stuff. And there's times when we can't do things, but so many times we can. We just don't. We allow other things that we want to do and things that we have planned. And yet we're hurt when nobody comes to our stuff. But we fail to realize that others have feelings too, and it's a genuine care. Paul says, that's why we did what we did. And he also says that there's a danger that we will be really good to that little group that we're so close to. We'll check on them. We'll visit them. We'll call them. But the group that sits over here on the other side of a house, we don't do those things or get those things done. It is sad that we don't care enough. See, the problem is love. This idea is agape love, and it's the idea of doing unto others as you'd have others to do unto you. Doing what's right, regardless of being willing to sacrifice ourselves, you see, in order to do something that will uplift and help and encourage other people. In 1 Corinthians 16 and verse 14, Paul gives us a rule of life, and that is to, whatever we do it with and through love. And then in the book of Romans, chapter 15, I think it's verse 8, might be chapter 13. But Paul says that we owe a debt. And the debt that we owe is love. And that's interesting. I think all of us recognize the importance of paying our debts, paying what we owe. But have we realized that we owe a debt of love? And it's because of what God through Jesus Christ has done for us. All of us have a debt. And we're expected to pay that debt. Because God loved us, we are to love one another. Are we doing that? Do we really care? Do we really love it? It might be that we're fooling ourselves into thinking, I love folks, I treat them right. But do I do good, you see? Do I really reach out to do something? Am I guilty of talking about folks in a bad way? Do I really have this genuine care? Because genuine care works. It's active. It's not just singing, oh, how I love Jesus, but it's serving Jesus as he taught in Matthew chapter 25. So this morning, am I nothing? Am I worth nothing? That's the question I must ask. Because if I don't have love for my fellow man, and it's not seen in my actions, then that's exactly where I'm at. This morning, if you're not a Christian, you can become one because God loves you. And those of us that are Christians, because God loves us, we have an opportunity to love one another. If you need to respond to correct things in your life or to become a Christian, the invitation is yours as we stand.
Reach out and touch the Lord.